My friends, hello. This debrief is a bit difficult because, quite simply, we have 5 people involved, including a 6-year-old child. But if I do it, it's because I firmly believe it can save lives. And I thank the people who support this channel. On Patreon, it's individuals just like you who allow me to have the time and resources to create this content. So today we're going to Switzerland in the canton of Graubünden on June 12, 2021. The canton of Graubünden is all the way in the east of Switzerland. It's the largest canton, and you should know that it's an extremely rugged place. That means it's covered with mountains. We're going to see 2 aircraft that will be involved in this story. The first one is a DR400. It belongs to what's called the Neuchâtel Motor Flight Group in Switzerland, or if you're in France, the Neuchâtel Aero Club. So it's a DR400 with registration. If I remember correctly, it's HBK Kilo Lima Bravo. And then we have a glider that's taking advantage of the thermals in the area. The region is extremely mountainous, and there are clouds that aren't very high above these mountains. Now, I'd like to show you something, this thing that I'm going to talk to you about today. This isn't necessarily covered in the pilot curriculum, whether it's at the flying club or even further along. It's not something that people talk about. I myself went as far as getting a theoretical airline transport pilot license without ever learning what I'm going to show you here. I learned these things while working with lawyers, especially in cases involving my 2 victims, against airlines, against flying clubs and others, and also by being a member of the CWI, which is the Institute of Insurers in the United Kingdom. So let me show you something. Look, we have these 2 planes that are going to end up operating in the same area. But I'd like to tell you something. If I take the sky, the airspace like this, if you look at it this way, you get the impression that it's vast. You get the impression that the probability of running into another one, of colliding with it, which is called a mid-air collision in aviation, is low. Well, you get the impression that it's extremely rare, but I'll show you why it's less rare than you think. First of all, that's the sky. At first glance, it's a huge amount of space, so you can fly wherever you want, which means that intuitively, the probability of meeting someone else is low. Look at this one. If I put mountains in this space, okay, here I'm drawing mountains. It's a zigzag, right? Which is supposed to illustrate the mountains. What are they going to do, these mountains, these mountains? You're going to subtract them from the available space. You won't be able to fly through the rock, so you remove everything that's rock. You take it out of the available space. So the available space you see is going to shrink quite a bit. Another thing, if we have a day with a perfect blue sky and everything that wasn't the case that day, you still have limits. Most propeller planes and all that can't climb very high. Okay, even saying that this DR400, which had a 160 horsepower engine, if I'm not mistaken, could still go up to 14,000 feet or more. Often you're limited below. So you have the ceiling of your plane. So it's like a pressure cooker lid, which is the ceiling of your plane. You can't go higher than that. So the sky, well, it's limited. Another thing you're going to have, like that day, clouds that are even lower than the ceiling I just mentioned, and that's going to limit things even more. The space. You can also have clouds that sometimes come in that are developing vertically. So clouds that do this, you see, and then they come and close off. You see, they close off this whole area, that unusable area. Well, it no longer exists. Then you also often have restricted or prohibited areas. You might have a military zone somewhere. Let's say here, you have a military zone like this, which also creates restrictions. What is it when you're in certain places? You can also have airways. You can have terminal airport zones. You can have approach paths, departure paths. What is the net result of all that? The net result of all that is that the remaining space is much smaller than the space you see visually or the space you might think you have available. So that means that planes will concentrate, and if they concentrate, the risk of running into each other is higher, just to give you an idea. If you take a cube that has, for example, 800 liters of volume, and you divide it in two, you divide each side in two, you'll get a cube that has 100 liters of volume because the volume changes very quickly with the cube. The side then is raised to the power. In an airspace, the more you restrict the airspace, the more you decrease its volume, the more you increase the growth. The thing about airplanes is, of course, the probability that they will be inside. The thing about it is knowledge. As soon as you see some terrain, concentrator, airplane concentrator, the more you see a complicated map, concentrate airplane hours, you see a map, complicated, it's a map. Paris region, Zurich, London area, all that, those are extremely busy maps with noise restriction zones, restricted areas, military zones, all that. Those are airplane concentrators. Weather, when you add weather to such maps, it increases the concentration of airplanes even more. And also, when you have terrain, it's also a concentrator of airplanes. It happened to me to be flying in the London area, and then that region to the north, I can't fly there, it's forbidden. This one to the south there, be careful, it's a military zone. So I'm kind of stuck between two places. And then suddenly the front line arrives, there are lines of squalls like that coming in, the weather is getting worse. And then I finally find myself in a tiny corridor where I'm allowed to fly. And imagine, inside there are helicopters, there are planes doing stall training. Inside there's someone doing aerobatics and so on. So we end up very close together, almost flying in formation in a space that on paper is extremely large. And unfortunately, that's not something we teach. You really have to be careful about that. So as I was saying, that day, we had two factors. The first factor is the mountains, which actually reduce the possibility of flying, plus a hazy sky, an overcast sky, which will also reduce it. So in this kind of situation, as a pilot, you say to yourself, well, over there, it's really nice. I've been through there. You're going to analyze, weigh the pros and cons, and think about a lot of things. And finally, you say to yourself, that's great, I'm going near that pass. Well, you know what? There are a lot of guys who have exactly the same idea as you with the same reasoning. So I'm telling you, we have the DR400. So the DR400 HB Kilo Lima Bravo, and inside we have four people. So four people here. We have the pilot. He's either 312 years old. There's a passenger next to him who is trained as a pilot but wasn't flying. The proof is that he was constantly taking photos, so he wasn't flying, he was just a passenger. In the back, we also have a passenger. This time it's a woman with a child, with a 6-year-old child. Let me put it this way. Since I started discussing insurance, I'll speak in insurance terms. Risk, when we consider risk, the same risk depending on the individuals, well, it's not seen in the same way. In other words, risk tolerance is not the same for someone who is 72 years old and someone who is 6 years old. Let me give you a simple example. In my life, for example, when I was in the United Kingdom, I used to fly planes. Well, I would take my daughter with me, and my daughter, what does she do? She plays with the plane's controls, she has fun, she takes pictures on the ground. I tell her, but she only got into a plane that took off, in a single engine plane. When she is in a plane that takes off, it has 4 jet engines. There's the Emirat logo on the vertical stabilizer. Why? What is it? The reason? The reason is that these planes, which are very well maintained, which are very safe, which are really of very high quality, well, their level of risk is excellent. It allows me to get on board. That means my risk threshold, my willingness to take risks, is higher than the risk represented by these planes. But if I arrive with my daughter, suddenly she has a risk penalty. She, with her risk tolerance, can't get on those same planes because for her, it would be too dangerous. Why? Because in reality, you have to look at the life expectancy of each person. If he is 72 years old, 72 years old, well, 72 is the new 62. He's not in the final minutes of the game. We agree on that. How many years does he have left? It's pretty cold. I know it's harsh what I'm saying. How many years does he have left to live? Because in terms of dignity, all lives are equal. When it comes to a compensation case, it doesn't work like that. 72 years old, how much time does he have left to live? Let's say, I don't know, the life expectancy in Switzerland, let's say more or less 15 years. I'm not talking about him as a person. I'm talking about his age group. I'm saying we can't know. He might have lived to 102. That's not the point. Or he might have lived until 73. We're talking about people as a group. So in this case, let's say 15 years. because I'm evaluating his life expectancy. At 87 years old, that 6 years, how much does he have left? He has 81 years of life left. You see that it's not the same thing at all. You see that it's not the same profile at all. This life has already had a very good life, 2,000 flight hours. He has flown a lot. He has seen a lot of things. 72 years old, that's right. He's 6 years old, 6 years old. He has a life expectancy of 81 years, maybe even more or maybe even less, considering how the world is turning. But what I'm trying to say is that a child has such a long life expectancy. He has his whole life ahead of him, literally, that when you consider the risk, well, we're going to put such a penalty on the child that there are many activities that would be forbidden to him. I'll just give you an example, still following the same logic. You know that, for example, you can have someone who is very sick and who is in a situation, I don't like the word, but in a desperate situation, you see. Well, in that situation, maybe some treatments, or let's say there's a dangerous, risky surgery, but we'll accept it. For that person, the person will say, I want to try. Whereas another patient who isn't at that stage of illness, well, that same operation wouldn't be ethical for him or wouldn't be desirable for him, simply because it's not the same degree, it's not the same level of situation and risk tolerance. You see, so personally, everyone does what they want. Of course, everyone does what they want. But personally, I think putting children in single engine planes and taking those same planes over the mountains and all that, just like that, even on paper, it's something that's, gives me a bit of heart palpitations, that's all. So as I was saying, they're there, and what do we have facing them? We have a glider with a pilot who's 52 years old. So this 52-year-old man, he's very experienced with gliders. He took off further north. He took off from Zurich near Lake Constance. He took off quite far, even beyond the canton of Zurich. And actually, what's happening is that he was described as someone experienced and conscientious. The problem is that at this point in our story, both planes are actually in the same area. It's been about roughly 5.25 hours that he's been flying. That's a lot. It's a lot. 5.25 hours. Well, after 5 hours of flying, in a glider, indeed, you're more experienced, but you're a bit less conscientious. Because even if people don't realize it, don't feel it, there's still fatigue. We're very cramped, the seat belts, the seat, the back pain, all that, the discomfort. I mean, after a while, after 5 hours in the seat, in the shell of a glider, the economy class on Ryanair starts to look like first class on Singapore Airlines. You see, so it's not, we're just happy to get off. That's all. We're happy when we get to be free. So as I was saying, they're in the same area. Our plane, our DR400, is flying at about 10,500 feet. It took off, it left from Neuchâtel to do a navigation flight in the shape of a triangle, roughly speaking. And what's going to happen? What's going to happen is that we have this glider that's flying in the area. So, do you know what the air rules say about gliders and planes? So, when there's a plane and a glider, well, the glider has the right of way, of course, because the glider is less maneuverable. It can't control its energy. It can't go up and down as it wants. It doesn't have an engine, whereas the plane is more maneuverable. So the more maneuverable one gives way to the less maneuverable one. Be careful. That's, of course, what's written. But in reality, this doesn't mean that glider pilots don't also have to look outside. They still need to pay attention to see and be seen. As we say now, between seeing and being seen, there are a number of challenges. I'll tell you about them. The DR400 is basically white. There's a little bit of blue, but it's mostly white. The glider. Gliders today are built from composites, and they're generally white. They're extremely slender. They have very long and tapered wings, and their fuselage is also extremely slender. And they're painted white. I don't know why we can't paint them white and fluorescent yellow. In any case, they're not in white, and when we see them, they're not very visible. It's not something that stands out there. They're at the altitude I was telling you about. We're basically at the snow level. It's at a point where the peaks start to get snow covered. Well, what happens is that on snow covered peaks, with a background of snowy peaks and a hazy sky. The glider, you don't see it, you won't see it at all. And if I may, of course, you see it even less when you're 72 years old. So, another important point to know is that, for example, sometimes someone has an accident, their car is totaled, it's not their fault, but the insurer raises the premiums. He says, it's unfair, it's not possible, it's not right, it's not my fault. The other person crashed into me. There is a logic to it. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not necessarily supporting it, but I'm telling you about the insurer's logic. It's that when we drive, we also drive for other people's mistakes. And if someone, every time another person makes a mistake, they get hit, well, the insurer may consider that this person represents a disproportionate risk compared to other drivers who are more careful. So when you look in a plane and check if there are no other planes around, it's pretty much like with cars. Actually, it's about seeing and being seen. For example, I was driving last night on a highway, the pedestrian or the motorcyclist are lights. You're not going to drive while waiting for them to imprint on your retina. If you do that, you'll get into an accident. If you come out, for example, from car 4, you look to the right and to the left. If you just do that, just that, without thinking, you leave, you'll have an accident one day. You have to actively look. You need active vision. That means I get to the intersection, I look again, I come back, I look for a motorcyclist. Is there a motorcyclist? I look for him, I look for him. It's not that I wait for him to appear, I look for him. If there isn't one, I go. Yesterday on the highway, I was looking for the guy who does anything. Well, at one point, I had a cyclist on the highway going the wrong way without any lights. All right, so this kind of thing, you have to work for it. So when you're in an airspace with high concentration, that means with mountains, like I said, restricted areas, clouds, all that, you have to actively look for the other plane. You have to say there's a plane and you have to look for where it is all the time. In airports, I'll give another example. I'm giving a lot of examples tonight. In airports, those people who scan the suitcases, they scan, they scan, they scan. You know that sometimes the system deliberately sends them an overlay, sends them a weapon or a knife or something. Do you know why? It's just to keep them awake, to keep them alert, because otherwise the person will let 10,000 suitcases go by. After a while, she doesn't see anything anymore. After a while, there's a Katyusha rocket or a bazooka or something. She doesn't see it. She's so tired. So the system helps them stay awake. So what I'm trying to say with this is that you need active research. So when you're actively searching in a plane, it's true that as a pilot, you don't really enjoy it because what you're doing is just flying. Scan, scan, you scan outside, you look at your instruments, you scan outside, you look at your instruments. It's true that it's not very fun, that's for sure. When you're in such a highly concentrated space like that, it's not very fun to fly. So maybe the people with you love taking pictures and all that, but you, as the pilot, you're not really there. As a tourist, anyway, there you go. We've said a lot here. And then what happens is that at some point the pilot talks to the air traffic controller. There's the radio with the air traffic controller. And with that, the glider is going to appear overhead. The glider pilot doesn't see him because the glider has a long, slender nose. Because of that, he can't see very well what's below him. In other words, he could land on a plane, he could come down vertically and land on a plane without ever seeing it himself. It's a bit strange because if you look at the canopy, if you're in a DR400, you can see very well upwards. But except that upwards, the sky is white and the sun is shining from above. Probably it's still quite low on the horizon, maybe about 30 degrees above the horizon. It's June, it's 5 p.m., so there's still quite a bit of strength. That creates ultraviolet rays, you see. So you have to look at those clouds to see white clouds to spot a white glider that's coming toward you. So nobody saw anything at that moment, its impact. What will happen is that the tails of both planes will be torn off. That means they're going to hit each other in such a way that the glider will be cut in two. And then the DR400 as well. So what's going to happen is that both planes will fall on either side of the mountain pass around which they were. The glider, what it's going to do is immediately dive. Of course, if you break the tail of a glider, you cut it off completely. What's it going to do? Obviously, the forces at play mean that it's going to dive literally right away, maybe even flip a bit onto its back. What the pilot does is he's equipped with a parachute, so he's going to jettison the canopy. He's going to free himself from his seat to jump, so he'll jump and open the parachute. The parachute starts to open and then it's black. Quite simply, these are the moments when time is swallowed into eternity. In fact, what happens is that he was short by a few dozen meters and he's going to hit the ground. Even before the parachute has time to start slowing the fall, the plane itself follows a pretty similar path. There's no parachute involved here, and it's going to fall about a kilometer away from the other one. So it's going to go into a ballistic flight and fall on the other side of the mountain. So there you go, there's noise, crashing, and then silence falls again. What happens is that the glider club will realize there's a problem. They'll take a look. There was a system that was carried by the glider, which allowed them to see on a computer roughly its movements, where it was, and all that. And they'll see that it lost about 500 meters of altitude in a few seconds. They'll say, wow, did you see what it did? And certainly it was completely out of the ordinary. Yes, sometimes it catches good thermals and climbs very quickly. Sometimes they can go down, but here they realize that in just a few seconds, 500 meters are gone. Then the signal fails, so they get worried and start calling around. It's 9 p.m., so the impact happened around 5 p.m. Around 9 p.m., we saw a Swiss air rescue helicopter. That's the Swiss helicopter rescue service that will find the remains of the plane. Well, not a plane, a glider. The rear of the glider was never found, so the tail of the glider probably broke off a bit farther away. Then it spun, carried a bit by the wind, and ended up somewhere in the snow. It was never located, but we saw the glider and the pilot, so by the evening, we knew what had happened to the glider's pilot. At the time, we didn't think about the DR400. So for the moment, the DR400, since it was in uncontrolled airspace, nobody really asked any questions. So what happened is that we had to wait until 9 a.m. the next morning for people at the flying club to say, where is the Lima Bravo? It hasn't come back. So at that point, the search efforts started to escalate a bit. And what happens is that it's only around 1 p.m., so nearly 24 hours after, or 20 hours after this terrible accident, well, what we have is the rescuers who are on site with a helicopter to look for the glider pilot and collect what they could from the glider. Well, they're there and then they're contacted and told, look around you, there's probably another plane that was involved. So they start searching, and there, what they're going to find on the other side of the mountain, they're going to find the remains of the DR400, and the 4 people who were inside, of course, all died. So here it's clear these aren't accidents. These aren't accidents with favorable outcomes. It's a collision. Sometimes it can happen. We saw, if you remember, over the Amazon, we saw a 737 hit a business jet. The 737 crashed. The jet was able to land. We saw recently, I think it was in Iran, over Iran or Iraq, actually over Iraq, American tankers that collided. It seems that one landed with the rudder or the vertical stabilizer damaged, while the other crashed, but often with light aircraft. Collisions like that, one against the other, usually end badly. So there you have it, my friends. It was a tragedy. It's a big, big tragedy with 5 victims for a situation that, as they say, no one could have predicted. It's clear that everyone was having fun. The pilot, the gliders were having a good time. The updrafts, the beautiful mountains of Switzerland, all of that. Well, you don't imagine that it's going to end badly. The DR400 that's flying calmly and all, well, he doesn't imagine anything like that either. But you see, you always have to be careful, always pay attention to avoid this kind of accident, especially when certain situations, certain factors are present Thanks again to those who support La Colonne Brisée through Patreon to help fund these videos I make here. And then we'll see each other in the next one. See you very soon.